Welcome to the Political Fallout Shelter, where we come to you each week from a windowless basement bunker here underneath the Capitol, safe from the political fights above. I am Leo Shane, deputy editor at MilitaryTimes.com, and with me, as always, is the nation's foremost expert at tactical sage grouse deployment, Joe Gould, Capitol Hill bureau chief for Defense News. Joe, how are you feeling this week?
Hey now.
Listen, wanted to start off, we had a very eventful week, as we always do nowadays, but the real big story was North Korea and the cancellation of the summit scheduled for next week. Maybe cancellation, maybe back on, maybe not. We've seen a lot of turns this week. The president issued a letter saying that he was canceling the summit, but then within 24 hours came out and told the press, no, it might still be on. We may see this, we may not. Look, a lot of foreign policy issues to talk about here. A lot of big questions about where this is going to be. But you and I thought about the 30,000 U.S. troops that are in Korea and all the military families there, the 40,000 more that are in the region. If you're one of them, what should they be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that things are better now, right? We're closer to talking, but that's a pretty low bar considering that several months back, the president and Kim Jong-un were threatening each other over Twitter. It's not so long ago that we were talking about bloody nose strikes that a number of folks on Capitol Hill thought were going to trigger an all-out war.
It wasn't so long ago, the president was calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man and just literally using nickname, ridiculing him.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, it may be a good thing that the talks were. I mean, hear me out here. I think it might be a good thing that the talks were called off. One of the criticisms was that, or we were seeing reports that the president wasn't really interested in doing the homework. There were criticisms that a lot of the diplomatic underpinnings for this whole endeavor hadn't really been done. And maybe that's what we're encountering right here. There was a big item that they didn't even have agreement on, which was the definition of denuclearization. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I have a lot of questions. I mean, I wonder, is that, diplomatic spade work going to happen now?
Sure. Yeah. Are we going to start with the president? Or are we going to start with lower level meetings? Pompeo's already been over there. Look, I keep going back to where we were 6 to 9 months ago, which is, again, the president and the North Korean leader trading insults over social media. Since then, the possibility of talks seem like an actual thing instead of a punchline. We saw 3 American prisoners released by North Korea. We did see something with North Korea destroying some nuclear facilities, although the depth of that is up for debate. But there's just it just seems like there, as you said, there may have been some progress here. If I'm a soldier stationed over there, if I'm a service member in the region, I hope I'm not overreacting to the twists and turns of all this. We heard Secretary Mattis come out on Friday and say, we're not changing any of our defense posture right now. We're comfortable with where we are. Diplomacy is going on. We're going to let that go. We're still keeping everything the same. So you wonder how much of that, actually translates and how much, obviously this is a very unstable situation, a very tense situation, but I don't know that it's necessarily a worse situation than we were last summer.
Yeah. I mean, this might just be what diplomacy looks like in the Trump era.
Well,
I will say, if there's some solace that service members could take, I mean, the Pacific Command's Admiral Harry Harris has just been named by the administration to be ambassador to South Korea.
Right.
We haven't seen him
Pretty
up here on the Hill.
Critical diplomatic post that's been vacant for quite some time.
Yeah, that's right. And you wonder if this summit got called off, was that in coordination with South Korea at all? Like, I don't know. That's kind of a down in the weeds question, but how closely are we working with South Korea here? Maybe once we have an ambassador in there, we can manage these things a little bit better.
All right. So our message to our fine men and women serving overseas is don't panic yet. And we're going to bring you some good news here because also this week there was a lot of talk about the military pay raise, which is my personal favorite topic to talk about anyways. We saw the Senate Armed Services Committee come out backing a 2.6% pay raise this week, which is the same that the White House has asked for, which is the same as what the House has asked for. So we're looking at a pretty decent pay raise for the first time. For the first time, we're not going to have a fight over this in quite some time.
Yeah, and it's the same in both the defense authorization bills out of the House and Senate, right?
Right. So what that means, we still have months and months of negotiation over that authorization bill, which is going to actually set the pay raise. But usually at this time of year, we're seeing some different numbers and we're seeing some conflict. The Senate might be going with something lower. The Pentagon might be pushing for savings over here. Right now, what we've got is everybody on the same page. So I don't want to tell people to go out and spend all that money right now, but there's at least a little bit more confidence that this probably isn't going to be a sticking point. Everyone's moving in the same direction, and if you're a junior enlisted troop, you can almost bank on about $700 more next year in annual pay. For some of the other guys, higher ranking officers and enlisted, it's about $1,500. So nice little pay bump.
I have to ask, the president has played a little fast and loose on this pay raise. Like, what the significance of it?
Wait, this president fast and loose with some facts. Look, this has come up now twice in this month alone, where the president, who has described the pay raise accurately for the last year or so, has talked about what a boost is, how important it is. Now all of a sudden has said that the military hasn't seen a pay raise in 10 years until he came along. This is the first pay raise they've gotten, and it's a huge pay raise and it's a big pay raise. And I sincerely don't know where this is coming from. The military has gotten a pay raise every year for the last 30 years. It's not always as much as civilian wages. It's certainly not always as much as some Pentagon leaders and some advocates might want, but there is always a raise. So for the president to say that this is the first one in 10 years is very suspect. And on top of that, the pay raise that we saw this year, 2.4%, is larger than what he asked for in his original budget request. He asked for a smaller pay raise to save some money for other modernization and recapitalization efforts. Congress overrode him. So not only is he taking credit for something that happens every year, but he's also taking credit for something that Congress vetoed him on almost. So it's been interesting, and I don't get what the White House gets out of hyping this up.
I don't know. Me neither. I mean, I guess if I could speculate, I mean, you consider the audience. I mean, that sounds great if you're talking to the most recent kind of, misfire on that came in Annapolis at the Naval Academy graduation. You're talking to that crew. You want an applause line. Maybe that's the motivation. I don't know.
But you're not telling them the right thing about their pay. It's just a straight mistake. I don't know if it's intentional, if it's a lie. I don't know if he's somewhere gave him bad information. He's now confused this. But as early as April, he was still accurately saying this is the largest pay raise you guys have gotten since 2010. Now all of a sudden somehow it's turned into this is the first pay raise you've gotten in a decade.
Look, if you want the straight dope on military pay raises, you got to go to militarytimes.com.
This is my thing. This is where I live. So look, the military pay raise is not going to be a major fight in the months to come over the defense authorization bill. But we did see this week the Senate finally unveiling their version of this policy bill, and we've already talked a bunch about the House policy bill. Why the authorization bill is so important. It's passed for 57 straight years, so this is really not only just a major defense policy thing, but one of the few trains that leaves the station every year. So what struck you about the differences in the two drafts we've seen, and what are the kind of fights we're going to see coming up?
Well, to bring folks up to speed, where we're at is that the House passed the bill that passed out of the House Armed Services Committee. Mm-hmm. The Senate
overwhelmingly,
like 351 to 66, something in that. It's so a strong bipartisan.
A majority of Democrats even backed this, even though there were some concerns over the price and some immigration issues they want to attach. But still, more Democrats supported this than were against it.
That's correct. And so the Senate Armed Services Committee has passed its bill. The text is hasn't been made public, and we don't expect it for like maybe another week. But the committee has shared details about the bill with reporters and others, and so we've got some sense of what is in that bill. Of course, the two bills are, the Senate bill is going to have to pass the full chamber, and then the two bills get reconciled over the summer. So in that process of reconciliation, the differences between the two bills turn into fights potentially. Sure. Sometimes they get massaged.
But in past years, those differences have been some pretty major things. One chamber may have, I'm thinking of like the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal was in one chamber but not in the other ones. Or one chamber may be advocating for military retirement overhaul or defense acquisition reform sort of thing. We don't seem to have that headliner this year. We don't seem to have that big knife fight that we're expecting.
Yeah, I think there's not a marquee provision. I mean, Space Force was one of those things that kind of like made it over the top outside of the defense press because it kind of captured the imagination of the general public that there might be a service dedicated space, but not so much this time. What I will say to answer your original question about where the fight might be is over end strength. You reported on this that there's a difference between the House Armed Services Committee's number, which is in line with the president's
the president
request.
And the House have asked for about 15,600 more troops spread through all four services. Senate's looking at about half that number, somewhere around 8,000. So,
and the committee staff has said that that the reason why is that there's a price tag. There's like an enduring price tag that comes along with bringing on more troops. They really want to take a fresh look at like, okay, you're asking for these troops, but it's kind of, reading between the lines, I think they're asking to do what? What is this in line with the national defense strategy? There's a cost associated with these troops in the out years. There's some concern. We had this major defense budget increase, but what are we going to see when sequestration comes back in? And so are you kind of handcuffing yourself to an enduring cost that you're just not going to be able to support?
Yeah, I found it really interesting to oversimplify both sides. The arguments, the conversation we saw over in the House was, yes, we finally got the money for a military buildup. We're going to do the full $717 billion next year. And the conversation over in the Senate seems to be, hey, we got all the money for the buildup. What are we doing with it? Have we had enough policy thought? Have we focused in enough on these bigger questions about how does this meet with strategy? What should our end strength be? Well, what are we doing with this equipment?
Yeah, if I can get really nerdy for a minute,
I know you can.
The policy issues that the Senate Armed Services Committee sort of addresses, they're beefing up the job of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, which is sort of the guy who you want in the meeting with Emmanuel Macron to be like both the outward-facing but also the inward-facing guy, the guy who connects strategy to, kind of ground fact, right? Like if you say you're going to be ready for great power competition, what do the units have to look like in order to be ready? And so the proposal is to make that a much stronger, important job. And, while wonky, I think it could change the way the Pentagon functions. And so it's sort of a low-key marquee provision in the bill.
That sounds like the kind of thing that not a lot of people will pay attention to, but could potentially disrupt the entire bill. It could be the sort of like high-level conceptual fight that is very difficult to find a common ground on.
Yeah, I think that's one of them. We joke in here about sage grouse. I've said it before that I think that there's a potential philosophical difference between John McCain, the committee chair, who is opposed to having the sage grouse in the bill, and Senator Jim Inhofe, who's the number two, who's actually running things while McCain is in Arizona recuperating. It's an environmental issue, protecting these birds. It's in the House bill. It has threatened to derail the bill. It's been a sticking point in these summer-long negotiations in the past, and it's in the House bill again. We could see it create problems again. And kind of the X factor is like, how does Inhofe handle it versus McCain kind of teaming up with Jack Reed to say it doesn't belong in the bill.
Joe, we usually end these segments with a little lighthearted look at what's going on in the week, but this is Memorial Day. You and I have a pretty unique and somewhat privileged position to be able to write about the military, to get into some of these issues that a lot of the public doesn't get to see. You and I talked a little bit this week about our grandfathers both serving in the war and thankfully coming back, and that's more of a conversation for Veterans Day. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I wanted to talk about some stories that we've covered, some people will be thinking about for the holiday, just as sort of an insight in some of the stories we get to see that maybe the public doesn't always get to see.
Yeah. So the person that I'm thinking about on Memorial Day, and it's not really just on Memorial Day, for whatever reason. I think a lot, from time to time, I think about a guy named Garland English. He was a first lieutenant, Bronze Star recipient, an Army engineer, who was 29 years old when he died in a rock climbing accident in Hawaii, where he was stationed. I wrote that up, and in writing up that story, talked to friends of his, a member of his unit. And they just painted a really vivid picture of a very unique service member. This was a guy who, read the Iliad and was like, here's this guy who was in the Army. He was like a very adventurous person, like,
I think
cage diving in South Africa, shark cage diving in South Africa. And he protested the war in 2004 and then went into the service in 2007 and listed civil disobedience on his resume. And just the love that his friends had for him was so evident to me that he's always kind of stuck with me.
When you told me about this story earlier in the week, it struck me that even with all the folks we talked to, even with all the veterans and military members we talked to, you still have that stereotypical image in your head of what they're, what a military member is supposed to be, and what somebody, and it's not always that kind of wacky kid in high school who's doing his own thing, or it's the crew cut, it's everything else. So.
This guy grew up in like upstate New York. I'm from New York. He was 29. I think when I reported on the story, I was like in my mid 30s. He graduated from Columbia. That's where I went to journalism school. And like, there's, I think we like to think that there's that there's this divide between us and the people serving, but they're really just like us.
Well, look, I've got two that are going to be on my mind this weekend. They're often on my mind. First one is Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash. There's actually been a fair amount written about him, but he was serving in Iraq in 2005 when Stryker was hit with an IED. He was outside. The vehicle was consumed in flames. 3 separate times he ran into the burning vehicle to try and save other guys there. Ended up costing him his life in the effort. He received a Silver Star. He's often talked about as somebody who probably should have gotten the Medal of Honor for his heroism there. A story that I think a lot of the public doesn't know about, but if the public knew about, is the kind of story of heroism that fits very neatly into that idea of serving the military, serving the country, serving your fellow brothers there. Just one that I hope our listeners can go out and maybe look up this Memorial Day, maybe give him a thought. And then one on a more personal level for me, I got, when I was covering the Don't Ask, Don't Tell debate a number of years ago, I got to meet Chief Warrant Officer Charlie Morgan. She was a New Hampshire Army National Guardsman. She was somebody who I actually met because she said, I read one of your stories when I was overseas. I read you in Stars and Stripes, and because of this, I learned about these organizations and started to get involved. She was very much involved in the debate over the Defense of Marriage Act and whether or not military members should get gay and lesbian military members should get family benefits. She passed away from breast cancer back in 2013, but was somebody who was serving right up until her death and saw a higher purpose, and somebody who, again, just in our roles, I don't think I would have met her in any other circumstances, but I think it was it gave me a whole new perspective on the military, just seeing what she was going through and how she decided to advocate for that.
Yeah,
So,
special people.
yeah, no, absolutely. So look, we'll be tracking those folks. I hope everyone has a Memorial Day where they can look up these stories, and we'll get back to our congressional fallout worries and everything else next week. You can follow us all week long at militarytimes.com and at defensenews.com. And I'm on Twitter. I'm at Leo Shane.
And I'm at Reporter Joe.
Thanks for tuning in.